Hello and welcome to Demystifying Poetry, the podcast that brings everyone closer to poets and poems. I'm your host, Tara Stubbs, and this episode I'm delighted to say that my guest is Kate Wakeling. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, it's lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. Kate Wakeling is a poet and musicologist who writes for adults and for children. A pamphlet of her poetry, The Rainbow False, is published by the Rialto, and recent work has appeared in the Poetry Review, Poetry London, The Stinging Fly and Magma, and has been broadcast on BBC Radio 3. She is the author of 3 poetry collections for children, and her work has been awarded the Clipper Prize, the Week Junior Children's Poetry Book of the Year, and has been nominated for the Carnegie Medal. She is also writer-in-residence with Aurora Orchestra. So I invited you here today, Kate, because I think the idea of making poetry more accessible and available is obviously quite central to a lot of the work that you do, not just from the perspective of writing poetry for children, but also in the ways that your work moves between genres, such as illustration and music and your work with orchestras. So I was just wondering, how have these projects helped facilitate your poetry writing and your interest in poetry more generally?
Well, it's interesting. I think, in a way, my very first step into any kind of public creative writing, if that's a term for it, came through a kind of invitation from Aurora, the orchestra that I still work with. And they asked me to write something for children. So it's interesting, in a way, that was sort of a beginning of lots of things. Although I'd been writing poems for myself for a long time, I hadn't... Yeah, I guess I sort of saw that as a separate process from something more public, and they asked me to write a kind of storytelling concert, a script, which was essentially the first commission. I guess yes, they knew that perhaps was something that was bubbling away. I already wrote program notes for them, and I guess they sort of knew enough about my other kind of background. But yeah, it was interesting, that sense of an invitation, and I think that's in a way what lots of people need, is that sort of being asked to do something, being kind of believed in to write, and then feeling sort of able to put something out there.
Is that then where your work in music helped as well?
Yeah, I think so. So funnily, my background is in music. That's what I studied at university, and I think that's probably how I ended up in poetry. The writing I did for myself, I initially was writing short stories, actually, and the stories got shorter and shorter until one day I sort of thought, I think actually this is not the form for me. What I really enjoy is focusing in on the kind of sonics, very particularly, which I suppose is what poems are so special for. And I think also something about the scale of poetry. I'm a kind of a natural obsessive, I suppose, and I like to fiddle very carefully and to feel, I suppose, a sense of control over being able to really manage each word of a poem. And so somehow that felt quite natural to sort of settle upon poems as the thing I really wanted to write.
I remember reading that Sylvia Plath was the same. She started with short stories,
right,
and moved to poetry.
That things sort of, yes, you kind of realise
it more natural.
Things condense, yeah. And in a way, I think because I think I'm a worrier, and I think there's something about you know the poem that you will have stared at every word like 150 times, whereas I feel with longer text, it's very hard to have all in mind at once.
Something will be missed.
Yeah.
Maybe. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about how you started writing poetry, how your work has developed, and what you've learned from that experience so far?
Yeah, so I think I didn't write poems for a long time. As a child, I think lots of authors seem like they've always been writing, doing creative writing, and that wasn't something I did. I kept a diary almost every day for years and years, and I guess that was somewhere where I was exploring writing in all sorts of ways. And then I actually did some field work. I was a kind of music academic for a period of time, and I did some field work in Indonesia, and I think something about being away from everything, I guess, that was familiar to me was when I kind of started to write in another way. And I initially wrote these short stories, which are buried somewhere in a hard drive, but I don't think particularly need to see the light of day. And and found that it perhaps wasn't the right form for me, that something more concentrated helped. And then I just joined some writing groups, and I think that was a huge step for me in terms of developing, being exposed to lots of different poetry, both in terms of the work that would be shared by different tutors, in that sense that, you look at a poem before you then share one another's work. But also, actually, it kind of made the idea of publishing work seem, I guess, realistic or possible.
Less daunting.
Suddenly sort of having a sense of where you might send poems to the idea that actually it was maybe possible and that they wouldn't all be rejected, which of course a lot were and continue to be.
And how,
That's the life of any poet.
and how did you develop your children's poetry work other than the work with the orchestra?
Well, it's really interesting because in a way that was all running parallel, that I was then writing a lot of these storytelling concerts, which is still running, called Far, Far Away, this series, and lots of other writing I do for Aurora, often for children, while also writing for adults. And then I just saw an open call from the Emma Press, I guess, this thing about being invited to do things that somehow it felt like, oh, it's a request somehow.
It's good timing.
Yeah, and I sent a poem in, and it's weird. It's probably the longest children's poem I've ever written. Ever, even though having now written so many more, because I think I was so excited by the process of it. I kind of crammed as many thoughts and ideas into this slightly too long poem, and I then wrote another one for them because they got some funding to do a kind of tour visiting bookshops, and they said, oh, if you want to write a second poem. And just on the strength of those two poems, really kindly, they offered if I wanted to write a collection, said they would publish it. So
that's brilliant.
So it was really
I must
helpful.
have been impressed.
Well, I guess a lot poured. It was weird. It was like it was in waiting. It was a really interesting sensation, actually. I think yes, a lot of the pleasure I'd taken in reading as a child sort of somehow came bursting out.
Oh, that's lovely. So have you found that children's audiences are receptive to your work?
In the sense of children?
Yeah.
I absolutely love performing for children, actually. And I think as a child, I loved acting, and it was something I think probably, lots of people feel like it would be super fun to be an actor. But it's really nice that performing is sort of part of my life now in a way that I hadn't expected, because it's a much more performative world, actually, reading for children. And I really enjoy it, and actually think increasingly about how to sort of shape poems for performance, I suppose. I mean, I definitely think of myself as a page poet, but I guess I'm alert that for children's work, it's very much about the sounding. And so, yeah.
As you know, children can be very honest if they they don't approve or like something.
It's great. Yeah, there's nothing more helpful than taking a manuscript before it's been published to us. I do lots of schools visits. And it's interesting, actually. It's often even before you read the poem, you just know it's too long, or that it's got a boring bit in it, or that this word... I'm always interested in trying to push vocabulary a little bit and set more complicated words up so that they can be understood in their context. But sometimes you're like, oh no, that's not that one. and you know it instantly. So
yesterday we talked to Dominic Berry about these kind of questions of place and space. And do you think that you're also thinking there about the responsibility to be in a certain space and understand what those needs are as well?
Yes, I think I do lots of schools visits or performances at kind of, literary festivals where big old audiences of schools come of like, suddenly there are just 500 children in front of you. And
wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. It's never not a lot. And yeah, I guess it's thinking, I think pacing feels like a very important thing in terms of how to hold concentration. And it's interesting, I think it kind of reminds me of putting together almost like a musical concert or it's a sense of programming in a very particular way of, okay, here's a poem where people are going to be able to join in, or if it's for younger children, they might be able to move to this poem because they're going to need to have a fidget, which is totally fair dues. So
that's great. Do you think this might be a good opportunity to share some of your poetry with us?
Yeah, I could read two poems if you like. I've got a poem for adults and a poem for children.
That'd be great, thank you.
I'm going to read a poem, and the title is just the name of a piece of music, which is Chopin's Prelude in D-flat major, opus 28, number 15, Raindrop.
And is this the adult poem?
This is the adult poem, and it's a poem, it's about this particular piece of music which evokes raindrops through a repeated note that runs almost the whole way through the piece. But it's also, it's a piece that me and my brother played, as you'll hear in the poem, not particularly well, but somehow it kind of held us together through some difficult times. And and it was interesting sharing this poem with him, how much he had a memory of it. I sort of wondered if I'd conjured it up in the way that memories can sometimes go strange. So this is Chopin's Prelude in D-flat major, Raindrop. We played it unthinkably. We were not pianists, my brother and I. In the quiet house, we blundered on with crooked necks and flat palms. We played to beige carpet and a closed door. It felt to me, this piece, like light, not rain, Light passing through a soft new leaf, where F is a leaf, and D flat is a leaf, and A flat is a leaf. We were lifted by its persistence. We didn't know anything, but sensed what it was to keep going in this place of not saying. And so we stumbled brightly on with our exceptionally uneven legato. We took it very purely. We certainly weren't listening. And someone, somewhere, must be at it right now, placing these same quavers in a line, making light from rain.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful.
Shall I read another poem?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
So on the theme of rain, this is a children's poem. Although it's funny saying children's poem because when I write these children's poems, I write some for much younger children, but the two collections with the Emma Press, I also think of. I like to think of the grown-ups who might be around while the children are reading the poems. So this is called Some Other Names for Rain. I call you the eyelash rinser and window pane racer. I call you cloud soup. I call you the tongue tickler, sock seeper, hair hassler, and ankle surpriser when paired with a passing car. I call you sky spittle. I call you leaf polisher. I call you the pavement drummer and umbrella summoner. I call you a brigade of micro water bombs having a skirmish with the lawn. I call you the puddle artist who will only draw circles. I call you a sprinkle of ocean far from home.
That's wonderful. And so you want to tell us a little bit about the illustration next to the poem, please?
Oh, I love the illustrations in this book. They're by a Latvian illustrator called Alina Braslina, who is wonderful. And it was, just a very serendipitous connection. Well, I guess a very a wise link made by the publishing director at the Emma Press, who's kind of spotted Alina, I think when she was kind of new out of college kind of thing, and I think this was her first international book, and she's now a kind of megastar in Latvia and everywhere. I just love the style of her drawings. There's something so sort of spiky and thoughtful, and having done 2 books together now, and quite a few events as well where she draws live, which is really fun. I didn't realise before what the skill of an illustrator is yes, about the image on the page, but also the thinking, and I think I can never predict how or what she will illustrate, which I think is always such a magical feeling when some little element of the poem is suddenly
brought out
that I would never have predicted, but it was always unfailingly sort of perceptive and beautiful and playful.
I once went to an event at the National Theatre, which was a poetry reading, and someone was live drawing next to it. And they showed what he was drawing, and he was doing it in the time that the poems took to be read. And it was incredible.
It's bonkers,
I've never seen anything like it. And as you say, they were almost kind of moving somehow because they were taking something very small that you might not have noticed in the poem and kind of drawing that into a shape.
Yes.
So it's a kind of reading of the poem, I guess.
I realised what a kind of intellectual skill it is, as well as the there's a kind of visual arts impulse. Really fascinating, and I guess it must be quite interesting illustrating poems as opposed to a narrative of some sort. I imagine maybe quite freeing and fun in some ways, in that you just get to, you don't have to follow through across a whole picture book or something like that. But
have you ever done your own illustrations for your poems?
I feel like that would be a different quality of book. I mean, it's interesting. I did used to draw, and I think when I wasn't really writing for other people, I used to make these sort of absurdly elaborate birthday cards for people, and I think that probably, I would draw on those often. I mean, I dread to think what they sort of look like, but I suppose they were certainly made with a lot of care. I see drawing. Yes, I've always loved drawing, but I don't think I think it's absolutely good and right that I'm not illustrating my own books.
Do you think it's a kind of expectation of children's poetry that it is illustrated?
It's interesting. I guess so, yes. I can't kind of imagine. It's quite rare that you find a book that isn't. And funnily, I'm working on a new book with Otterbury Press, another excellent children's publishers, and this new book is going to be kind of full colour. So it will look more like a kind of sort of bigger picture book. It's for younger children, and I can kind of see how that works in some ways. I think because I've got a book for younger children, but because it looks like it's black and white. It's quite small, and it's funny when you share it with smaller children. It feels like, this isn't. You don't normally look at books like this with really little people. You kind of feel like something larger and colourful instinctively makes sense. Or I suppose it's just because that's what all the other books look like, and so why should poetry? I guess just less cash.
It makes you wonder why, weirdly, that more adult poetry isn't illustrated.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, funnily, actually, the Emma Press quite rarely does do that sometimes. They have I think they're called Art Squares, a series where they pair. But it's, quite rare, and I think, it's sort of, I think, not disconcerting, but it's unexpected, isn't it?
Yeah.
And almost as if it's kind of risky that somehow the expectation that the poem comes to life as an image in your brain. But yeah, why shouldn't it be illustrated?
I don't know. It could be a way in for people, couldn't it? If people have more of a visual sense than a verbal sense, it might help them somehow.
Yeah, and I also think thinking of a book, the kind of pleasure of a book as a physical object is, I mean, I don't think it's underrated, and I think lots of people do think about it, but I think that could be a really lovely thing, particularly as if you want to give somebody a poetry book, the idea that it's a
Well, I'm
a
definitely
nice
seeing
thing.
for my son, actually, who's nearly 7, that he's making that transition from books with illustrations to books without, and he does think they're really boring.
Right.
It's a bit like, what's the point of this? It's
Yes.
like, well, the story's in your head. He's like,
Yes.
is it? Or is it, it's quite...
It's an
It's quite a
important
sudden
shift.
shock.
Yes, yeah.
And now you have to read inside your head as well, it's like... So the context of that kind of work for young people can be really, like you say, open and pleasurable, and then somehow the reading becomes more constrained with more parameters, I think.
Yeah, and kind of private, which is also one of the lovely things, particularly about poetry. But I guess, but it's also different. Yeah, when it's just in your head.
Exactly. And I thought that your poem about Chopin was really beautiful, but I wonder if you might just say a little bit about the way that music and poetry kind of interlink there, because I'm much more familiar with what we might call an ekphrastic poem, which is a response to a painting. But I don't know of as many poems there are response to classical music.
Yeah.
So is that something that you do quite often?
No, I'd never done it before, and I suppose I sort of had the idea, and it took me ages. It's interesting. I had a kind of go at it and got stuck about 2 years ago and sort of jettisoned it, and then I can't remember why I came back to it. I think I thought, come on, you can do this. Like, you've spent all this time so sort of absorbed and immersed in music. I think, I sort of felt like you do have some things to say about it. And I don't know. I guess I suppose it in the way that lots of poems emerge from a kind of impulse that's hard to word, and that often the poem doesn't actually word that impulse. It's just that wordless impulse somehow sends you somewhere that does have some words. I think that's sort of what music does a lot for me, and I think this particular piece of music, I mean, I think it's a piece of music that I think lots of people have a very strong response to. It's a very beautiful kind of gentle piece, and it's interesting that it moves between this very kind of radiant, warm major key section at the beginning and at the end, and then in the middle has this very kind of turbulent, dark bit. And I think in those sort of expression of different moods, it seems to mean a lot to a lot of people.
Because you mentioned that it had been healing for you and your brother, and obviously you won't go into that, but I just wondered whether you were saying something there about the fact that poetry can be useful for things and might move with you as well at different stages of your life.
Yeah, I think so. I suppose in a way the writing of the poem and the piece of music occupy not dissimilar spaces. Neither of us really learnt the piano very formally, but we did play it a lot. And my mum's a music teacher, so we were sort of taught a bit, but neither of us kind of particularly went for the piano. But we spent loads of time sort of crashing through things. And for some reason this piece, was one that we both sort of learnt. But it was funny, in a absolutely not competitive and certainly never to perform. We just would sort of honk away at it really inexpertly. But it's funny, yes, I think at this point of, it was just my parents separating. It wasn't like a huge drama, but it was also very sad, in the way that just sort of normal big sadness. But it's interesting, the writing of the poem, it felt like a special poem to work on. I'm not saying that the poem itself is special, but the process of work on it felt particular to me. And actually, interestingly, my pamphlet that came out with the Rialto ages ago, that time of writing, I think I was very, very interested in the sonic power of poetry, but I think quite hesitant to say anything, actually, in an odd way. And interestingly, my brother, he phrased it very, very nicely, but he sort of said, oh, it's interesting, those poems, you're not there, are you? Or I can't think how he put it, but somehow as if he was sort of interested that I never wrote really about myself in any way at all. I suppose I got my own back by then, including him. I can't deny we're both.
No, it's lovely. I mean,
present.
I really like third-person poems. You don't get them that much, I think. We get lots of I's and a few U's, but not that many we's.
Yeah.
So it's really lovely. It really stands out. I wanted to ask, there's something that keeps coming up in all of our discussions for the podcast is the question of what it might mean to be a poet and to sort of claim that that sort of title, but also that space. Have you ever had issues with that or kind of awkwardness around any of that?
Oh yeah, I mean, it took me absolutely ages to sort of feel I could say I was a writer, and certainly to say a poet. And I think it would be I can't think of an occasion now where I introduce myself as a poet. I think it feels a bit much, doesn't it?
Well, last series we talked to Brian Bilston, and obviously he's very kind of successful in a commercial sense. And he was saying that when he goes to the US, he has to say, I'm a poet, where he, when he gets his sort of entry visa.
Right.
And how embarrassing he finds that. Because it makes him sound so pretentious, but he literally is.
Yes, and if he doesn't, he might get
job.
denied entry.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And he can't lie, but there's something, I don't know if you've ever met him, but it's quite bashful. So it's this whole idea of and he hides his face.
I know he has a kind of anonymous...
it's not his name, and he never has a picture of his face. So for him, it's really exposing to say, I'm a poet. Whereas other people can, embrace it massively. So.
Well, I think for me it's because I still am so happy to write poems and so sort of glad that I feel like it's a bit... It almost feels a bit like... I still can't quite believe it's true or allowed to say it, so don't.
What, because you'll jinx it?
Well, or just, it just seems, I think, yes, I can now say writer, although even that I think seems a little, I don't know, because I remember someone saying they just knew someone who introduced themselves as freelance. But no, I think I probably would say writer, and then usually people say, what sorts of things do you write? And then I say, well, actually, the main thing I do write is poems and poetry, and then I feel I need to give lots of explanations of the other sorts of writing I do.
That's interesting, isn't it? As if you have to, justify it with more practical examples of writing?
Yes, I suppose it's a bit like as if you're saying like I'm an explorer or something. It's like it's
you're an explorer of words.
Explorer of words.
Yeah. So do you? I mean, obviously you read poetry, but how do you read it? And do you prefer to read anthologies or collections? Do you like to go to events and readings? How do you kind of bring it into your life?
Yeah, I do read a lot of poetry actually. I think and I do try and read all sorts of things, but I think I also have young children. I think it is really great reading poetry in the sense of the amount of time it takes to read a poetry collection versus a sort of any kind of novel, really.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I'm a kind of I buy a lot of poetry books. And I suppose I read to write in a sense that I'm sort of always reading to sort of feed my own writing quite selfishly, slightly dirtily. but I think there's something about the acquisition of books and what a great pleasure it is when you sort of find something that really sends your thinking somewhere different or just feels like it's found a new way to put things on the page.
And would you sit and read children's poetry as well as that?
I never read children's poetry. Actually, I guess that's an admission, isn't it? No, I don't seek it out at all, interestingly. And it's funny because I think where I write from for children is very grounded in memories of me as a child. I think I write for myself at about 8 or 9. And then when I'm writing for children much younger, I have my own children and I suppose in a way I see the input for writing poetry comes from adult poetry, and then I kind of it goes through a particular sort of filter.
I think I can see that from your writing because it's accessible, but it's not easy, I would say, your children's poetry, or a bit like the one you read just before, that kind of level.
Yeah.
It's like you can hear the examples and they are relatable, but put together, it makes for quite a complex poem in some ways, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of pleased to hear. I feel like there's a lot of different sorts of children's poetry, and I suppose I feel like there is a lot of really charming, rhyming, funny children's poetry, and I'm really pleased that's all there. But I sort of never
Like
felt that was. Yeah, but I suppose I felt like there's lots of
there is lots of
that, and it's great. But maybe I was sort of excited to try something else.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that We're Going on a Bear Hunt is a poem? Because I don't think it is, but then I read all the way, he's a poet and he writes, and
well, I think
Going on a Bear Hunt is a poem. And
it's interesting, yeah. I mean, because the sort of picture book as poem. I don't know. I mean, Meg Rosen obviously does write poetry collections and lots of other poems. But I think there's a sort of interesting. I suppose it's a bit like song lyrics and poems and picture books, and is a rhyming picture book a poem? I suppose I feel like it's sort of grey. A greyish area. It's different. I think.
Just don't want to answer.
I'm not going to answer. Yeah, you
should get into trouble.
I think I genuinely don't know, and also because I've been having various stabs over the years at picture books, and I can't quite settle into it as a form. So I can sense that there is something different.
I think they're deceptively simple, aren't
they?
They're
very deceptive, and because
we all think we can do it, but we can't.
No, I'm not sure I can. Yeah. I've been trying.
I definitely can't do the picture part.
But I think there's something about what I want from a poem, which is it's kind of an openness and a not sort of single state, but I'm not always sure I want it to go somewhere too deliberate that's needed in a picture book. So I feel like I keep writing these.
So you want it to sort of stay in its moment?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, my agent was saying maybe you should stick to poems. She said it really nicely, but I think she might be right.
You know your skills.
Yeah, or kind of what I want from a bit of writing, and it's. I'm pleased to read other people's stories, but I'm not sure. I need to read my own.
So just as we're winding down, I just wondered if you could share with us a poet or a poem or a collection of poems that you would recommend, particularly for people who are interested in finding out more about poetry or who haven't read any poetry for a while. If you would recommend anything.
I mean, there are so many thoughts I had, but actually I kept coming back to a truly wonderful poet called Emily Berry, who's who's very well known. But I think there's something really sort of special about her writing in that it has a wonderful strangeness, which I think is one of the really magic things poetry can do to kind of take us into a world of strangeness. And her most recent collection, Unexhausted Time, I don't know exactly, but I think quite a lot of the poems are kind of almost dreams. They're kind of dream/poem. But she also writes with such a kind of clarity that I suppose was what made me think, for someone who's perhaps not been reading lots of poetry or not read lots of poetry, that it's there's something inviting about that. And it's very clear and very beautiful, but also very strange. So somehow you're welcomed into the poem, but then still given a lot of space to kind of...
So it lets you in and then it unsettles you slightly.
Lets you in, then completely unsettles you, and sends you somewhere very different.
And is she a formal poet, or does she have a loose relationship with
form? It's really interesting. Her most recent book, Unexhausted Time, they're almost like prose poems. They're kind of they're kind of block text. But her second collection, Stranger Baby, actually has a whole mix. I think that was another reason I thought might be an interesting thing to bring up, because there's like a play script, a very short play script. Okay. Yes, there are some slightly more formal. I don't think necessarily rhyming, but there's a kind of, I think there's a real sense of play with form, and certainly use of white space on the page, very imaginative. And the book itself the theme is deeply serious. It's mostly reflecting on her mother and her mother taking her own life, but at the same time there is a kind of an amazing levity and kind of a very dark humour, and but often very beautiful and very moving. So
it sounds like everything quite helpful as well.
It's an amazing book. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. It's been such a wonderful discussion, and thank you also for sharing your beautiful poems with us. It's been really interesting to think about poetry from the point of view of children's poetry and from music as well, so thank you.
It's been such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. See you next time on Demystifying Poetry. If you've enjoyed the podcast, do consider sharing it with your friends and your neighbours and anyone else you know. And also, you might consider sharing it on social media channels. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, or you can comment on YouTube or Spotify.